What's up, Auburn? Pastor Crespo here with Pastor Dustin Hall of the Try Jesus Auburn podcast with another Q&A episode. Pastor Dustin, we're here. You ready to go?
I am.
All right.
I'm excited about this one.
Well, good. We have a question that I have a question I want to throw at you. Before I do that, of course, look, we always plug the website, tryjesusauburn.com. You hear from us on the podcast. The website is where we hear from you. So if you want to get a t-shirt, if you want to get a Bible, if you want to engage in a Bible question, if you have a question that we'll put it on the podcast and let you know when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know, tryjesusauburn.com. Pastor, today we have a question, and I'm going to set it up a little bit different. I'm going to put it in as an experience.
Okay.
So I met this person who, they're not anti-church. They're not anti-God by any means.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever you talk about the subject of going to church, they're like, nah, I don't want to go. Nah, I've heard all this stuff before, or they don't really seem to get excited. Almost like, it's like asking them to go get a root canal. They're, no, I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who find church, and I think we did a previous episode on why the Bible is so boring.
Yeah.
But maybe this one is almost like, why is the church boring? What there are people that are like this, that they find the church just is not doing it for them. But obviously you and I disagree with that. Today, I would like for you to kind of talk a little bit about what are they getting wrong?
Yeah.
What do you want? What would you like people who have that mindset about church to know?
So I think it goes two ways. So I think to some degree, people aren't engaged by the church because of what the church has become.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to talk about that here in just a second, but I think the church has become a place that is designed to please consumers rather than being a dynamic movement of people who believe in Jesus. So I think there's one issue there. We'll talk about consumerist mindset here in just a second.
Yeah.
And then the other side is that I'm not getting anything out of this. So it's a realization that the church is a place I go to receive things.
Yeah.
And if I'm not receiving the right kind of things, I don't see any purpose for it in my life.
Yeah.
The word church is actually in the Greek means those that are called out.
Called out ones, yeah.
The called out ones. Called out of what? Called out of the world and sin, and called out of the other way of life. So the church was never meant to be a building or an institution. The church was meant to be a group of people who are on a journey getting to know Jesus, and their lives are being changed, and they want to tell other people about it. That's church. And if church could get back to that, it would be much more engaging. And that's what it's all about. So let's talk about a few things here. Okay, so I think things that people get wrong about church, number one, they go to consume and not to participate.
Yeah. Like you're going to a theater or to a comedy club or something.
Yeah, or a store.
Yeah.
Does the store have what I want to buy? No. Okay, I'm going to go to a different store, or I'll shop online, whatever. So they go to consume and not participate. Here's something, and I don't know if this will be controversial, but church is not for your entertainment. A lot of churches have become that. The bells and the whistles and the lights and the smoke and the loud music. I mean, and if churches have that, I'm not against that. It's just that I don't want churches to become only that.
Yeah.
It's not to be what I go to get when I go to church. It's not what I go to receive when I go to church. Church, I go to church because I want to gather with the other called out ones to praise God, to worship, to express my thanks to God. That's a whole different dynamic than I'm depressed all week. I haven't spent time with God. I think that's a big one. People don't spend time with God during the week. We're going to talk about that more in just a second. And so they come to church empty, expecting to be filled, but that's not when the church is the most dynamic place it can be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people have a total misconception. You're bringing up something just people have a total misconception of why I go to church.
Mm-hmm. The church at times can be a gas station where you go to be filled.
Yeah.
And it should be that at times. But if you're going every week
Mm-hmm.
in order to be filled, you're eventually going to be disappointed, because the most dynamic part of church is that church should open our eyes to the blessings of God all week. And so we come together to celebrate and praise and thank God for what he's done.
Yeah.
And we worship through giving money. We worship through music. We worship through wanting to know him more in his word. That's what worship, corporate worship, is all about. That's what church should be all about.
Yeah.
So that's what Psalm 30 or 63:1 says.
Do we have that? I think we have that.
I think so. Psalm 63:1.
Bring that up here. There you go.
Oh God, you are my God. I earnestly seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry land and weary land where there is no water. I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands.
That's an awesome text.
Powerful stuff. So David is going to the sanctuary because he realizes how good and great God is. And he goes there to meet him and to worship.
Right.
And if the church...
That's the spirit of giving.
Right.
You're not coming to get. You're going with the spirit to give.
Yeah.
Worship and praise.
Right. And even in our prayers sometimes at church, Lord, bless us today. I think we should shift that and say, Lord, let us be a blessing to you today, because you've been blessed so much. You've blessed us so much this week. You've done so much for us.
Right.
So the minority of the time when we go to church, it should be to be filled up.
Yeah.
Most of the time we go there to empty out and praise God. And actually in doing that, we actually are filled back up.
Yeah.
We get more out of it.
Right.
But if you're constantly going there to consume, you're eventually going to be disappointed, because it will never, the institution of the church can never be enough to fill up an empty soul.
Well, I find it interesting too, because oftentimes you hear this, that people will go to church if they know that a certain pastor is speaking. And in a way, I do understand that, because I've heard some really good sermons, but then I've also probably sat through a few some eggs that have been laid.
Yeah. I've probably laid a few myself.
But me never. But the idea is that if you go to church looking to give praise, in that respect, it doesn't matter who's there, because it's not, I didn't come to get, I came to give. And in giving is when you get you get that infilling, right?
Right.
And not that preaching isn't important. You need to have that needs to be good, but
and that actually is the whole focus of the Christian life, isn't it? We give of ourselves like Christ gave of himself. And in doing that, that's actually what fills us up.
Yeah.
In our lives, if we're constantly thinking about what someone can do for us, think about a marriage like that. You're only worried about what your wife can do for you and make you happy and serve you. That's going to be an extremely unhappy marriage, because they're humans.
Yeah.
We're humans. We're going to disappoint each other. But if we're constantly thinking about how I can love and serve the other person, and both parties have that mindset, now you've really got something dynamic.
Right.
And so we need to have that giving attitude, that not a consumer, but I am there to worship and give back to God.
I've had opportunities to talk about not specifically this, but things that surround this topic. And one of the things that I like to maybe use as an example is Christianity. Just there are people that live out their Christian faith because it's a set of teachings that they've been taught. So put on the shelf, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, and all the other religions. And so I've chosen to live according to this rule.
Yeah.
But it takes on a whole different thing when the reason I live this way is because this is what I was taught how to live by, versus I do this as my expression of worship to the living God. I do this because I want to please God.
Yeah.
It brings a whole different level of meaning to what you're doing. And I don't think you can truly experience really the essence. I don't know that you can truly experience what it is to be a Christian if you're just following the rules
Yep.
versus, no, I do it because I want to show my worship to him.
Yeah. Yeah. So the second thing is, some people say they don't go to church because of all the hypocrites.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
I've heard that a number of times.
So what's the answer?
Man, I think we all need to realize and ask this question: who among us isn't a hypocrite?
Mm.
You know,
Oh, you just.
aren't we all in some ways?
Oh, I'm not answering that question.
We all are.
Yeah.
The problem comes when you have people that have an holier than thou attitude.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
What I would say, my answer to that to people would be, not all churches are like that.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself in a church and being discouraged by church because everybody is there judging and condemning each other, because probably they realize deep inside their hearts they are hypocrites, and it's easier to point the finger at you than it is to point the finger at yourself and look inside yourself. And if it's constantly that and it's a toxic, maybe that's just not the church for you, right? But I think if you look at people and say, oh, they're preaching Jesus and preaching about, this or that, and they don't live that way, or they, obviously if there's major moral distance between what you're preaching and what you're doing, don't commit adultery and you're out there committing adultery, obviously that's a problem. But we are all on a journey. We're all learning. We're all growing. God loves us and accepts us and helps us where we are to overcome those things. We all need to realize that we're all hypocrites in some way. Again, the problem comes when there's a holier than thou judgmental attitude amongst the members. That's a whole different animal than just saying there's a bunch of sinners there. Well, they've said the church is a hospital for sinners. So everybody's in a mess in a way. I posted online this past week, I think I said, they say that the church is a hospital for sinners, but the problem is sick people tend to make other people sick. You get contagious, right? And so some people avoid church because of that. They feel that they're being infected.
So not to say opposite what you're saying, but I've heard people use that same reasoning that I don't want to go to church because of all the hypocrites, to be almost a cover up for the fact that they don't feel good enough to be able to go to church with all these other good people.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting concept, dynamic there. But
I think that's a great point. I think my dad, I'll use my father as an example. So he grew up drinking and smoking, and he was a Marine, and he lived a rough younger life, and he met my mom and started going to church. And in him, the people that were close to Christ and were good examples inspired him to be a better person. Right. And so I think, again, it all comes back to the attitude. And if you feel judged simply by the lifestyle of other people, that's a you issue. It's not a them issue. But then you need to ask yourself, have I talked to those people about how they live and why they live their lives? And I guarantee, if they're good Christian people, they won't talk to you about your lifestyle in a judgmental and hateful way. They'll realize their own frailties and their own weaknesses, and it's because of that recognition that Christ has given them victory in their lives.
Right.
It's the people that judge and condemn through words and deeds and shutting people out of the church and saying you can't be here if you're going to dress like that, stuff like that. They themselves have not dealt with their own sin. But people that truly, genuinely love Jesus and are on a walk with him, they realize their own frailties. And so they're not going to judge you or make you feel judged, because they know that they just have different sin.
That's a good place to be, isn't it? I heard a story of a person who says, I don't want to go to church. He was talking to a church member. I don't want to go to your church because there are too many hypocrites there. And the person's response was, you're right, and there's always room for one more.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
And that was rather deep. I mean, that's true. You're right.
When somebody said to me one time, I think we may have mentioned this on another episode, but whenever you go to church, you'll always get what you're looking for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh,
if
that's a truth about life.
It is. If you go to church and you're looking at the people in the church and say, well, that guy yells at his wife, and this person over here, I know what they do on Thursday nights, and they don't teach a good enough,
Yeah.
Bible study. And if you're constantly looking at the people in the pews, you're going to be disappointed, because anywhere you go, there are
Yeah.
human people, and human
Yeah.
people will disappoint you. But if you go to church looking for Jesus, you'll always find him. You will always find him
Yeah.
when you go to church.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one is, and I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but people get this wrong about church. They believe that the church is only as good as the pastor. They believe the church is only as good as the pastor. So in my pastor's heart, I hear people say, I go there because this pastor's so great, so dynamic. And in one hand, I go, wow, that's really great. Because it makes me feel good as a pastor. Well, there's a really good pastor out there doing a good job. And this is what all our churches could be like. But then another part of me kind of cringes. And I go, but that's not why you should choose a church.
Yeah.
That's not why you should choose a church.
Yeah.
And in a way, that kind of goes back to this consumerist ideology. Because, and I think we have this passage, what is the job of a preacher or a pastor? What is the job of a church? Why does the church exist? This is interesting.
Oh, Ephesians, yeah.
Yeah, it says, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, so the ministers, that's what it's saying, the shepherds and teachers, to equip the saints, to equip the members for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain the unity of the faith of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature to manhood, to the measure and the stature of the fullness of Christ. So a pastor exists, church leadership exists, church structure exists for the sole purpose of equipping the members of the church, the people who attend the church, to do the actual ministry. So pastors should be servant leaders who lift up the members to do effective ministry.
Yep.
And that I think is something that's largely lost throughout many churches. And often is the mindset, I go there because of this pastor.
Yeah.
We need to be really careful with that. Is that pastor, who's a really good preacher, also equipping and giving you opportunities to serve and helping you grow and helping you learn about how to do ministry yourself?
Yeah. Right.
Or is it just simply, I go for an hour to be entertained by this sermon,
right,
or to shake the hand of this person who's charismatic and good looking and fun? Or do I go because I want to be equipped to do the ministry of Jesus in this world? That's a different focus.
So this idea, when you say, I don't want to go to church if it's too boring or whatever, you don't realize it, but you're saying that there's probably more wrong with you than there is with the church. If you've ever thought about it, if you are of that opinion, Pastor Dustin is saying that there's more wrong with you than your church.
Could be. It could be. That could be the case.
You
that
like
could
how
be
I
the
like
case.
to-
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. So the church is not only, you can have a pastor who's not dynamic, who doesn't give a powerful, charismatic sermon every week, but he exists to build up the members. Think about this. What if you had 50 really good leaders in the church and members who live to support that leadership, versus one really good preacher or ministry leader, one versus 50, 60, or a whole church full of people who are effective ministers, leaders, teachers.
They get more done.
So you get more done, and it's a much more dynamic and enjoyable place.
Yeah.
But again, if they used to instill, they do this in New Jersey, but they go to the gas station, they pump your gas for you.
Yeah.
If you're thinking of your pastor as the gas station attendant who fills your tank, eventually you're going to be disappointed, and your church is going to become dead. Eventually it's going to die off.
Yeah.
But if everybody pumps their own gas and their tanks are filled by the blessings of Jesus, and they go to be equipped and strengthened and encouraged to do the work of ministry, that's a dynamic place.
Yeah.
So why are we going? Are we going to be entertained by the pastor, or are we going to be equipped to do ministry in the church and outside the church?
Let me ask you a question. Wasn't planning on asking you this, but how would you go about, maybe someone's listening, but you as the pastor, what are some best practices to go about to get people to change their mindset? Is it just having these type of conversations, or are there things, what else would you do, if anything, to try and change a person's perspective on this whole, church
So,
thing.
are you talking about if I'm a person at home thinking about going to church, or if
Yeah.
I'm the pastor of a church?
Well, no. Well, if you're the pastor of the church, but someone's listening to you, and maybe they're saying, I don't like going to my church, or I don't
Mhm.
get a whole lot out of it.
Mhm.
I'm not getting anything out of going to my church, so why should I go?
Mhm.
How would you get them to? Because you're saying, look, you need to look more inside
Yeah,
than
yeah.
outside, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it just telling them that, or?
So I think some simple things. Start paying attention to the everyday blessings.
Mm,
Start writing them down. God showed up here and here and here and here in my life. We do praise and prayer time at my church.
mhm.
And we ask people, "Hey, how's God been good to you this week?" And quite often you get one or two people speaking up, "Oh, God did this. My daughter was sick," and
Mhm.
you get real simple thing. Why don't we have a whole list of stuff that
Right.
we think of off the top of our head? God did
Yeah.
this for me, and this for me, and this for me, and this for
Yeah.
me. So I would encourage people to start paying attention, even to the little things
Yeah.
where God shows up and helps you.
Yeah.
Answered prayers.
That should be maybe the most dynamic time of the service.
It should.
You know,
Yeah. Testimony
I've
time.
told people that the prayer time, as you're describing, is a time where we are telling our visitors that God doesn't just hear, He does,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's when we express thanks for what He's done. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so start paying attention to that stuff. Spend more time with Him in the Word. Even if you don't have time to sit down and read, put the Bible on while you're driving. Put the podcast on while you're driving.
There you go.
Spend time with the Lord and His Word.
Yeah.
And spend time praying.
Right.
And then say to yourself, okay, what's an area of my church where I can make a difference or I can help?
Mhm.
Or what is my church doing outside of what happens once a week? What outreach do they have? How can I make a difference in my community?
Right. Right.
And if you have a good church, they're doing things outside of their four walls. They're
Mhm.
making a difference in the lives of people. So paying attention to how God is pouring into us, and then coming to church with the mindset of, I'm coming here to be equipped to pour into others.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Dustin, if we should do an episode, when I can do it now, but this is about people, right?
Mhm.
But maybe we need to do an episode on what the church needs to do to not be boring.
Sure. Sounds
Maybe
good.
we need to consider that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
So
sorry, didn't mean to get you off track.
No, I think those are the practical things. And it goes along with number 4 here. So what people get wrong about church, number 4, they believe that church is only once a week for an hour or two.
Yeah.
And many times people
That's
have
all it is.
had this mindset about the church. Well, I'm checking off my box here. I've been to church this week, or I've been to church this month,
Yeah.
checked off my box. And if church isn't over by 12 o'clock,
I'm out.
I'm going to get mad, I'm going to get upset, or I'm
Yeah.
going to leave, so
I've been in churches growing up where they would hold their watch up
Yeah.
for the pastor when they came to. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a little boy thinking, what in the world?
So again, like we said under number 3, if you're doing those things outside of the church, now church becomes a place of praise. It becomes
Yeah.
a place of joy, and church worship, being called out, being one of the called out ones, becomes a day by day process. And then the church worship, the corporate worship, becomes a place where people come together to praise the name of Jesus,
Yeah.
to study about Jesus, to learn more about Jesus, to grow
Right,
closer to Him. So because you've been filled up all week, now you're able to joyfully celebrate. And as you look through the Old Testament specifically, and parts of the New Testament, their convocations, their Sabbaths were days of feast. They're feast days, once a week.
Celebration.
Feast days, celebrations.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, we turned church into almost like a duty, something that you must do in order to be called a Christian, or to be called to say that you're saved.
Right.
Church should be a privilege and a joy rather than a duty or a task.
Right. No, that's excellent. I think, again, the answer to this question is really, there are two things. It's what you're bringing, the individual, what you're bringing to the table, your spirit, your attitude, right? I'm summarizing what you're saying. But you're kind of touching on, I'm hoping we can do an episode on this. You're kind of touching on us, the church. if you are a pastor of a church, if you're a leader in your church, maybe your church is boring because you're not doing what you need to do as a church.
And I don't know if it was a chicken or the egg-ish situation where did the members become spiritually dead? So the church service turned into a gas filling station where it was all about what we can pour into them to fill them back up? Or did it happen first where we became about money and the big show, and it turned people into people that were so entertained that that's the only reason they were going to church, and the spiritual death started to happen? I don't know if it was one or the other. It'd be interesting. There's probably studies on it somewhere. But what happened first? Church became a place of entertainment, or people had to come to be entertained because they were just not coming to church with the right spirit?
Right. So if you're looking to get your gas filled at the church, that's probably not the right attitude.
Not if you're going there every week to do that.
You'll just be a gassy Christian. So we don't want that.
No.
Okay, so Pastor Dustin, you really have challenged our Try Jesus family. If you are of the opinion that I don't really go to church, I'm not getting a lot out of it, you're challenging us that maybe you need to look more at what's going on inside of you than what's going on inside of your church, right?
Yeah.
And but that's not saying we don't have a responsibility as church leaders,
of course,
to make sure our church is being everything it can be. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome stuff. Aside from my weak attempt at making some jokes here.
Potty humor is always funny.
When you go to church, pray for me. All right. Anything else you want to share before we close?
No, I think that's it. Grow closer to Jesus and make him a part of your daily life, and then your worship experience will be so much more dynamic.
Excellent. An overflow of that. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Pastor Dustin. We will see you all on the next episode.